Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Monday, February 2nd. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. For years, Kettleman City in Kings County has raised concerns about its proximity to different pollution sources, including hazardous waste.
Maybe the town's largest concern is just 3 miles away is the Kettleman Hills landfill, which is one of 2 hazardous waste landfills in the state.
A California law was supposed to add more guardrails for people living near these high-risk pollution areas, but that hasn't happened. We'll learn more about why in just a moment.
Support for Central Valley Daily comes from the members of KVPR. Join at $8 or more per month and access ad-free NPR podcasts through NPR Plus. Give now at kvpr.org/donate.
And now to our feature story. Kettleman City is a bit of a misnomer. It's actually a small, unincorporated community in Kings County with fewer than 1,500 people. Many of you may stop there on the way to the coast. The town sits at the intersection of some of the most bustling highways in the region. That's Highway 41 and Interstate 5. And it has a handful of gas stations, fast food joints, and hotels. But for the people who live there year-round, it's more than a stopover. It's home. And they've dealt with a major pollution problem for decades. Traffic is just one of those sources, and the other is a nearby hazardous waste dump. Years ago, the state passed a law aimed at better protecting residents by changing how permits for these landfills are handled. But the follow-through by the Department of Toxic Substances Control, or DTSC, has been lacking. To explain why, today I'm speaking with Alejandra Reyes-Velarde. She's an environment reporter with our news partner, CalMatters. Alejandra starts our conversation by laying out the 2015 law that told DTSC to overhaul its permitting process.
I think to talk about that law, which is Senate Bill 673, it's important to kind of understand a little bit of historical context around that time. First of all, for many years, environmental advocates have been trying to get people to kind of acknowledge people's lived experiences, that there are multiple sources of pollution that they're dealing with that are impacting their health. So this idea of cumulative impacts is something that has been a core part of environmental justice advocacy. And part of the reason for that is because in the state, agencies make decisions about polluting facilities on a facility-by-facility basis, not looking at this broader picture that people living on the ground know is a huge factor into how they live, their health.
Sure. So,
yeah, that's part of it. But really kind of what led to this law was the Exide crisis in 2015. Exide, the battery recycling plant, shut down because people found out that it was contaminating the soil with lead and arsenic. And that's what kind of finally prompted state leaders to pay attention to how these polluting facilities were being regulated. So that's how we got to Senate Bill 673. Then Senator Ricardo Lara passed this law that basically told the Department of Toxic Substances Control to update its permitting process in a way that considered cumulative impacts. At the time, it was a huge win for these advocates who'd been wanting this for so many years.
And that was in 2015.
Right.
Okay, so now 11 years later, where do things stand with the California Department of Toxic Substances overhauling their permitting process?
Yeah, I should say, too, that the legislature gave the department a deadline. They said you had to update your permitting process by January 1st, 2018. So not only has it been 10 years since the law passed, it's been 7 or so years since that deadline, and the department still hasn't completed that legal obligation.
So they haven't updated things on the proper timeline, but did they institute any new rules, or are they just supposed to enforce the rules that were decided in 2015?
So they still haven't completed that kind of the regulatory process. They did implement some part of the rules, which is an update to how they score facility violations. They implemented that in 2018, and actually they're going through a process now where they're updating them again. But the bulk of this process that they were required to complete, they have not
Okay.
completed yet. So that's still something they're discussing now.
Your report mostly focuses on Kettleman City, which is a town in Kings County. New toxic waste rules could affect that town. So I thought you could tell our listeners a little bit more about Kettleman City and just what it's like.
Yeah, my reporting focused on Kettleman City. Contrary to the name, it's actually not a city. It's a very small town of less than 1,500 or so people. It's a largely agricultural town. It's surrounded by pistachio and almond trees and other farms. And it's a town of mostly Latino workers who live and work in these fields.
And it's also ranked as one of the most polluted towns in California, according to a state ranking tool. So, what pollution sources are residents grappling with there?
That's right. Yeah, it ranks in the top 25% in the state's CalEnviro screen tool, which ranks census tracts based on environmental burden. There's a few things that residents are concerned with there. First of all, there's a couple of freeways there. The 5 freeway is near the town, obviously bringing a huge amount of traffic from cars and trucks that, spew diesel fumes and particulate matter that people are breathing in there. There's also a composting facility that handles sewage waste, which people have complained about odors near the town. And of course, there's the farms nearby where farmers often spray pesticides, and that's something that worries people.
And there's a toxic waste landfill as well, right?
That's right. Actually, that may be the town's largest concern is just 3 miles away is the Kettleman Hills landfill, which is one of 2 hazardous waste landfills in the state. And that's a huge concern. I also should note the Department of Toxic Substances Control has been in the process of renewing the landfill's permit for 10 years. So residents don't want it there at all, but also they're worried about the fact that, or concerned about the fact that DTSC has spent 10 years renewing the permit.
How does the lack of a rollout of these new toxic waste rules tie in with Kettleman City?
Yeah, well, first of all, the fact that it's taken DTSC so long to even get to this point of the rulemaking process has meant that the Kettleman Hills landfill isn't going to go through this more rigorous permitting process that they're working on now. That permit is expected to be renewed later this year. And because the regulations aren't final, it can't be subject to the new regulations right now.
Do folks in Kettleman City hope that these new potential permitting rules will positively impact the town?
Yeah, I mean, the rules are still really important for the residents there because, again, it'll introduce more protections from these polluting facilities. So if there's another hazardous waste facility that wants to, move in to any area, then without these rules, they aren't subject to these stricter protections, and residents have just one less tool to kind of fight against these polluters.
Okay, now it's my understanding that some environmental activist groups are not actually happy with how these new regulations are rolling out or how it's played out so far. So, what are environmentalist concerns at this point?
Yeah, for sure. Besides the fact that it's taken this long for them to get to this point in the process, they are not happy with some parts of the regulation. So, first of all, the regulation requires facilities to kind of paint a picture about the people living near the facilities within a mile. So, what that means is they basically have to paint a picture of who is living near the facility. Are they in the top most environmentally burdened areas based on CalEnviro screen? What other sources of pollution are in this area? And residents feel that a mile isn't it isn't a big enough radius because, for example, in Kettleman City, the landfill is 3 miles away, and residents there feel that they've suffered the health impacts from the landfill for many years, even if it's, just a few miles away. So that's number one. Residents want a bigger radius. Another contention that people have with it is that they don't feel that the regulation truly considers cumulative impacts in a way that would reduce pollution. And that's because any decision to deny a permit would actually be based on just one facility. So in the regulation, it says DTSC shall initiate the process of denying a permit if the cancer risk is over a certain threshold for a facility. But that's just for one facility. It doesn't say the permit shall be denied if the cumulative impacts are greater than a certain number. What residents have really wanted is that kind of more aggressive approach for DTSC to say, you can't have another polluting facility here because the pollution is already too great.
And basically, they feel the scope of the rule is too narrow.
Yeah, definitely.
You spoke with a lobbyist who represents the California Council for Environmental and Economic Balance. And what was her perspective on the situation?
Yeah, she had a few interesting things to say. One, she said that she felt that it was kind of a zoning decision, a planning decision, that there were leaders that were allowing these communities to be so near polluting facilities in the first place, and that there needed to be some different mechanism to make sure that that doesn't happen. She also said that there was a concern of more permit denials, kind of putting a strain on the hazardous waste system in the state. Already, there's been a lot less hazardous waste facilities than there was many years ago. And we have to do something with that waste. It has to go somewhere. It has to be processed somewhere. So having less facilities could introduce added costs and just kind of more pressure on the facilities that there are.
Before I let you go, Alejandra, what's next with the overhaul of these toxic waste rules? Do we have a timeline for when they could maybe come out?
Yeah, so the next step is that DTSC will hold a public hearing on February 3rd, where the public can give them feedback. People can also submit written feedback. I think the hope from advocates would be that they take that feedback into consideration and keep working to improve the rule. But as for what they will actually do, whether they will have a date for when they implement the rules, that's still up in the air. I think that advocates would also say they're not very hopeful that DTSC will take their concerns into account just because of how the process has played out, because they've spent years giving their feedback and don't feel listened to. So yeah, it remains to be seen, but we'll definitely, keep everyone updated with our reporting.
Alejandra Reyes-Velarde, environment reporter with our news partner, CalMatters. Thanks so much for joining me and breaking this down for us.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
And that is today's show. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
This is Tanya Mosley, co-host of Fresh Air. You'll see your favorite actors, directors, and comedians on late-night TV shows or YouTube. But what you get with Fresh Air is a deep dive. Spend some quality time with people like Billie Eilish, Questlove, Ariana Grande, Stephen Colbert, and so many more. We ask questions you won't hear asked anywhere else. Listen to the Fresh Air podcast from NPR and WHYY.